Welcome to the Pennsylvania Trolley Museum's Zoom series, Trolleyology. My name is Kristen Fredrickson. I'm the manager of public programs and outreach here at the museum. Thank you all again for joining us today. Welcome back to those of you who we have seen at many programs before. This virtual series features programs on Pennsylvania transit history topics, stories of the trolley era, or cars from our collection, cities where they come from, all things that you can experience from home, usually on a Tuesday or a Wednesday night. And we're going to continue these as long as we have presenters. So if you have a program that fits our museum mission, please let me know. Like I mentioned, that's going to be anything about Pennsylvania, the trolley era, cities where our streetcars come from. And if you have something that doesn't quite fit those guidelines, please reach out anyway. We will have a full list of upcoming presentations on our website at patrolley.org, which I'll drop in the chat so you can click on it in just a couple minutes here. And thank you very, very much to those of you who donated when registering for tonight's program. We really appreciate your support of this program and the museum. So if you're new to the Pennsylvania Trolley Museum, we were established in 1954 as the Ardent Electric Railway by a group of trolley enthusiasts called the Pittsburgh Electric Railway Club. And we actually just celebrated the 70th anniversary of the first cars arriving at the museum in February. And we opened to visitors in 1963. And we're along the route of the former interurban between Pittsburgh and Washington, PA. We've got over 50 cars in our collection now. I need to update that. It says nearly. We've got like 52 now, I believe. And a couple dozen of them almost operate. And we have over 30,000 visitors per year who take the 4-mile scenic ride at the museum. And a couple things. We are open. We are open year-round now. So this month, April and May, we're open Friday, Saturday, and Sunday from 10 to 4. So you can come visit us, take a trolley ride then. And then we'll have extended hours Tuesday through Sunday, June, July, and August. So make sure you come check us out, especially one of our spring events here. This weekend, we have our Members Day and Volunteer Appreciation Dinner. And then May 4th and 5th, we're trying this new event called Vintage Communications Weekend. We'll have everything from typewriters and antique telephones. There's like a Jeep command set module coming. Let's see, the local amateur radio club is coming and they're operating a special event station. So if anybody out there is an amateur radio operator, you can work us on the air at W3T on May 4th and 5th. And then we have a black tie gala and a speakeasy on May 16th, which is going to be a lot of fun. That's our big fundraiser for the year. And May 18th and 19th, we also have another new event, which is going to be a street fair with everything from fire dancers, stilt walkers, jugglers, magicians, live music performances. It's going to be a blast. So make sure you check that out as well. Let's see. Yes, Whiskey 3 Tango. And then for a lot of people on this call, I think I'll be seeing a lot of you at the West Penn Trolley Meet on June 7th and 8th at the museum, which also coincides with the Hoosier Traction Meet. So if you are an attendee of either of those meets, I'm looking forward to seeing you. We'll have vendor tables. We've got about 40 tables so far. If you're interested in selling books or streetcar memorabilia or models, please reach out. And then there'll be a night photo session and all sorts of fun things going on. Trolley parades on Saturday. Honestly, I can't wait because it's always fun to have a bunch of trolley aficionados in the same place at the same time. So again, happy National Volunteer Week to all the volunteers out there. And now I would like to introduce today's presenter, Jacob Mecklenborg. So Jake is a Cincinnati native who created one of the city's first local history websites in the late 1990s. He's a graduate of Ohio University in Athens, Ohio, and he's worked as a photographer and writer for several newspapers and websites around the state. He wrote and published Cincinnati's Incomplete Subway, The Complete History, in 2010. So at the end of this presentation, we'll have a question and answer session with Jake. But the chat box will be open throughout the program. So if you'd like to enter questions or comments during the show, we'll scroll through those at the end. And just to note, this program is being recorded and will be shared on our YouTube channel within the next couple weeks. So at this time, I'm going to ask everybody to turn off their videos just so we can minimize distractions, and we'll keep everybody muted until the end as well. I'll invite everybody to unmute themselves and turn their videos back on at the end. All right, Jake, if you are ready, take it away.
All right, do you see it? Hello, hello?
Yes, yep, we see it.
Okay, just making sure. All right. Hi, everybody. Kristen, thanks for the invite. I wrote this book 14 years ago, but the subway has been a part of my life and every other kid who grew up in Cincinnati's life since we were little, because you see the portals from I-75 and you think when you're a kid, if I could just get in there, I'd know why the subway didn't happen. And when I was 19 years old, I snuck into the subway and I left the subway with more questions than answers. So, everybody wants to go down there and see it for themselves with that same thought that they'll come to understand it as well. But the fact is, the seeing it from the inside doesn't really tell the story at all. I mean, the story is very complicated and it involves things that don't exist anymore, especially interurban railways and how dense the city of Cincinnati used to be, and how accessing the hilltop and distant neighborhoods was so difficult because of the city's topography. So the image we're looking at right here is from late 1920 or early 1921. And this little curve you see here is the southern terminus of the subway. At the time they put up what they thought were temporary brick walls there where that curve was being made. But 100 years later, that's still where the subway ends. And where does it end? It ends on the edge of downtown. And it doesn't actually go through the center of the downtown. And it was intended to, but that it was not built through for reasons we're going to explain here. And that's why the subway has not been able to really be used for anything since then. All right, and real quickly, if you've not been in the city of Cincinnati, probably one of its greatest landmark might be Cincinnati Union Terminal, which is the railroad station you see here, which opened in 1933. And Union Terminal and the subway have nothing to do with each other. So there was some planning in the 1910s for a Union station on the Cincinnati riverfront that would have included a station for interurban railroads next to the steam railroads. So all the traditional passenger railroads. That didn't happen. This site was selected instead. What you see around Union Terminal here is a doomed neighborhood. This neighborhood doesn't physically exist anymore. It's been replaced by light industry and interstate highway ramps and I-75. The station itself, the half dome you see there, is still there, and you can visit it. And this next image, you see it again during the 1937 flood. And I bring this image is so useful for explaining the subway situation for several reasons. Number one, the city of Cincinnati is surrounded by hills in a way that's somewhat similar to Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Pittsburgh's hills are definitely higher and steeper. Cincinnati's issue is as much the lowland that you see here that becomes flooded by the Ohio River as it is the hills around it. So you can see this neighborhood is typically up to the third or fourth floor level, kind of like South Philadelphia or a lot of New York City neighborhoods. And it wasn't a good place to live at the time because there was the risk every single year of what you see here happening. Now, Union Terminal itself was built above this very, very high flood level. So this was the highest flood level in city history, which is about 80 feet. And you can see that the terminal is okay and the tracks are okay and still operating. And actually, if you look at the hill above the terminal to the left, you'll see sort of a scalloped shape. And that is the dirt that was brought down to raise the terminal out of the floodplain. So anyway, I also bring up this photograph, and it's so useful because our subway was not flooded by this flood. The Cincinnati subway is actually fairly high above ground, as is downtown Cincinnati. So there was a small subway modification that you'll see later in the presentation, which would have taken it down into the flood zone, which is ridiculous. But anyway, I bring this up because the situation in Cincinnati is just subtle. With these slopes that subtly go down to the level of the Ohio River, and what you see in the background here is not the Ohio River. It's the prehistoric path of the Ohio River tens of thousands of years ago. So, an individual creek can turn into, the Ohio River can reclaim its old route as it did here. And so here we are in 1929. Construction started in 1920, and in 1929, we have somebody already declaring the whole project a botch. So one of the first paragraphs, it says, the Cossian useless, quote, rapid transit tunnel, which lies buried under Central Parkway, was a botch. Well, okay. So you can see there's this smear campaign where the subway was celebrated when it was planned and designed and under construction, and then it was vilified soon thereafter. So here in 1958, rapid transit system now in use. So it's just this one overpass which is being used by construction equipment for the interstate highway that will demolish it. Here in 1955 and 1961, we see two above ground stations being destroyed for expressway construction. And so it's worth now saying that the tunnel, the main tunnel that's 2 miles long, has 3 stations. They're still there. And then the above ground section that was completed was supposed to have about 7 stations, depending on which ones they actually built. They actually built 3 of them. And here, this is a ridiculous article that I had to bring up. And this really shows the depth of the smearing of the Cincinnati Subway, which is an article in the Cincinnati Enquirer in 1975. It was originally published in the Washington Post, warning Washington, D.C. about what was going to happen to it when the Washington, D.C. Metro was under construction and completed. It was going to be a boondoggle just like the Cincinnati Subway, which is preposterous because the Washington, D.C. Subway has been very, very successful. Here we see, save for its more cluttered architecture, the Cincinnati station could be mistaken for a station recently constructed in Washington. No, it can't. They're totally different. And here, this is in reference to Cincinnati. This misbegotten child was conceived in the wrong period of the city's history. Wrong. That's also wrong. Here we see more recently, about 10 years ago, down at the bottom left, Cincinnati Subway. Will the new streetcar end up with the same fate? I'm not going to elaborate on that. That could be its own presentation. And then we have more recently from 2021, abandoned subway still costing city 100 years later. On the right, Cincinnati stuck with maintaining subway over more pricey options of filling it or renovating it. And this is going back to 1912. This was the first organized report on building basically what became the subway. And I highlighted the names at the bottom right. And I highlighted them to show who the people were involved in the very first report. So the first one, William Cooper Proctor. The last name was not a coincidence. That is the grandson of one of the founders of Procter & Gamble. The second guy, W.A. Julian, was president of a local bank. Third guy, Herman Schneider, was an engineer at the University of Cincinnati College of Engineering, which is now called DAP, Design, Art, Architecture. No. I'm sorry, I have that wrong. But he was the person who started the famous co-op program that still exists at UC. So we had 3 very serious people behind this very nice report, very well-written report. And then years later, we have people saying the subway was just a terrible idea by terrible people. So here we have, I'm just going to show some construction photos. They're in a somewhat random order here. Here we see the main interurban train platform under construction. This is in 1920, in the place of the former Miami-Erie Canal on the edge of downtown Cincinnati. So in the distance, you can see one of the old canal bridges is still up. And you see here this is a kind of a complicated platform design. We'll come back to it later. We'll see pictures of it from the inside. The station is obviously still there. And if you go on a tour of the Cincinnati Subway, this is where you go. And this is a very nice map, which I found by random in a box at one of the small libraries around town. And it is a map of, number one, the alignment of the plan, but also where all of the abutments were going to be for bridges. And I think that this is such an easier map to read than a lot of the other maps that are more stylized. Between the 2 blue arrows, the reason I drew those was to show you that when the line was actually built, there were some changes to from this original plan. So these are actual borings from, I think, 1916. The line between the blue arrows was actually built above, north of the B&O tracks. And then this blue line, which is outside of, it's away from the rest of the tracks. That's where the line was actually extended to before construction ended. So the east side wasn't built at all along the river, but around the top was, and they changed the route in a couple ways. Here is the canal route, and these blue arrows, each one of them points to a spot where the rapid transit line deviated from the canal. So the canal itself, offered to have very cheap, easy construction if you followed the canal exactly, but the canal wasn't perfectly straight. And what's funny is the roads that have been built over, Central Parkway has been built along those original canal curves, but the rapid transit right-of-way kind of cut those curves. The rapid transit line was built for a top speed of 45 miles an hour, and if you try to take those curves at 45 miles an hour, you're going to end up on the curb and wrecking your car. So the curves are actually a little bit sharper than they even look when you come up on them in a car today. Close to downtown. So this map is also so useful because in red, we see all of the streetcar lines. I'm going to take a drink real quick here. We see all the streetcar lines that existed in the 1900s. And then you see in black the alignment of the canal and where the rapid transit line was going to go. The blue arrows point to test borings for the portals for a tunnel under Mount Adams. So you can't tell from this map, obviously, because it's flat, but there's a major hill between those 2 points. Here we really see the whole problem with using the canal. So the canal made it able to do this project so cheaply, but the canal doesn't go through the center of downtown, so there has to be some way of accessing downtown. So there were, thoughts that you could just build it along this alignment that you see here. The problem is if it becomes too successful, the meat of downtown was 5 blocks south. Over time, the department stores, the office buildings are all going to start getting built along the black line. And that means the people that own the stuff to the south, they're going to see their property values deteriorate. And the actual center of downtown could move north. And there are examples of that happening around the United States. Downtown Los Angeles moved. I think in Boston, they were a little bit afraid that downtown, the real functional center of Boston could move to Copley Square. So it was a very real threat. And this arrow points to the spot where the canal made a 90-degree turn, an abrupt 90-degree turn. And one of the main criticisms of the subway you'll hear to this day is that, quote, the curves were too tight, meaning they somehow built this subway system and it had curves that were too tight for the cars. I've heard educated people make this claim. It's preposterous. It's not true. This actual turn, I always look forward to when I actually walk through the tunnel for the first time myself to see how sharp this turn is. And it's really not that sharp when you're in it. All right, so here's some construction photos. You can see the canal was owned by the state of Ohio, and the state of Ohio did not enforce any sort of local building codes or anything like that. So a lot of people who had property that backed up to the canal built awnings and additions right up to the edge of the canal. And they even had things that overhung the canal illegally, which should have been illegally. Here's downtown, or I'm sorry, close to downtown. And I really love this image. This illustrates that one of the conditions of the construction of the canal, of the subway project, was that there were actually 2 entities that built the subway. So one was a Rapid Transit Commission, which was dedicated to building the 16-mile route we just saw on the previous map. But then the park board was going to build the road above it. So when we say $6 million to build the subway, the first phase of the subway, that's not really true because there was the cost of building the road above it, which was covered by the park board. But the park board also extended the subway and built one of the outer tunnels as well. And part of the purpose of this was, as you can see, they could have run the rapid transit line at grade right here. So part of it was to build a road above it, a nice new road, but then also to contain, I think, the sound and commotion of the subway trains and not have, because this was a very dense neighborhood, not to have trains running at 45 miles per hour right through it. You can see toward the bottom of the frame, that cylindrical thing. I think that's a sewer up to the level of the Central Parkway that's there now. Here is the entrance to the Brighton subway station soon after it was built. So we're about 2 miles north of downtown Cincinnati right now. The old building to the left is a brewery, and you see Central Parkway completed over the top of it. I also read that this was the first 3-phase traffic signal in the Cincinnati area. So the first yellow light in Cincinnati history was this intersection. And there you see a picture of that first traffic light with a yellow light. Here's the canal about 4 miles north of downtown. So by this point, the city sort of stops and you're out in the country already. And hard to believe this is about 6 miles north of downtown Cincinnati in 1922 or 1923. I mean, it is the country. This is the Ludlow Viaduct. The neighborhood that you see in the distance is called North Side, and here they are building one of the above ground stations. Actually goes below this road here at this point. We'll see a picture of that station later. This bridge that you see with the arches in the distance survived until about 1990, and I-75 was built between those arches. I still remember that from when I was a kid. So the two different directions of I-75 went through those arches. Here we are back out in the country. In the distance, you see the spire for the, I think it's the St. Aloysius Orphanage in Bond Hill, which is a Cincinnati neighborhood. So some of this out here was already city of Cincinnati, but some of it was not. And that's actually a little bit of a factor in the evolution of the project. Here we are on the edge of the country, and they are digging a tunnel. I'm sorry, not digging a tunnel, they're building a tunnel. And this is one of the 3 short tunnels that are not the main canal tunnel. This is in Norwood, Ohio. And here's one of the portals. Here is a new retaining wall. So this freight railroad you see here in the foreground is the Baltimore and Ohio. They were going to build the 2 rapid transit tracks parallel to the Baltimore, Ohio for 2 or 3 miles. Here's that station I showed like 2 or 3 slides ago, the Ludlow Avenue station. And you can see how it's a surface station, but the road, Ludlow Avenue, actually passed over it here. All of the above ground stations had this flat roof, concrete roof design. And I noticed something today when I was going back through this, that how easy it would be to climb onto the roof from the staircase. So I'm sure it's sort of a flaw in the design. I'm sure they would have to put a fence of some kind up to keep teenagers from climbing onto the roof. It would have been too tempting. I'm sure some did, even though there were never any trains here. This is a typical overpass out in the country. Here's more. I mean, this looks exotic, like we're digging the Panama Canal here or something. We're about 5 miles north of downtown Cincinnati at this point. And this is in the Camp Washington neighborhood of Cincinnati. This is near the city garage, so where the city still repairs its police cruisers and stuff is in this area. And you can see here in the middle the concrete pylons for a bridge over this street here. And this is such an interesting photo. This is the subway completed, but just dirt on top. So I already mentioned that, you know, the Rapid Transit Commission, the original $6 million, did not fund construction of the road above it. So years later, about 5 years later, there was a separate vote. Actually, after several failed votes, there was a separate vote and to build Central Parkway, and that is what funded actual completion of the roadway. And what's crazy, you see some other photos. I don't have any in this slide presentation where people just started parking their cars on top of this dirt, and there was actually a call to just turn this into a parking lot and not have it be a road. Also in the distance, you see one of the hills surrounding downtown. So I didn't really show any photos of the city at the beginning. I think we'll see the way that the downtown sort of encircled by hills as we go on. So planning of the 1910s. We're going to have a variety of people here who are quite familiar with the interurban railroads, especially in the Midwest where it was flat. You know, with the exception of Cincinnati, which is a hilly city, everything we're looking at here in the middle is pretty flat, and it was very easy to build these railroads. And they were a new generation of railroads that use electric power, unlike the old steam railroads, and so could use right-of-ways that weren't really possible in the past because they could climb steeper grades. And you can see the way they're sort of approaching Cincinnati. Actually, here we have the better slide, in a sort of haphazard manner, but from all directions. And none of these were able to get into downtown Cincinnati, in part because the Cincinnati streetcar used, the streetcar system had a broad gauge. I think it was 5'2" 2.5 inches. So a few of these interurbans used the same gauge so that they could use the Cincinnati streetcar tracks to get to downtown Cincinnati. The other ones you had to switch. And so herein lies the whole problem. There's this anticipation that the interurban railroads are going to be a big, big deal. And Cincinnati needs some way to get these railroads into the core of the city. So other cities like Columbus and Indianapolis, because they were flat and not as big as Cincinnati at the time, their interurban railroads were able to get into their downtowns relatively easily. They didn't have the same issue. So here, 1916. Here is a promotional pamphlet for the plan. On the left, what they kind of don't do, which is a little disingenuous, is they're not totally forthcoming in the fact that the $6 million was not enough to build the entire loop that was shown, that was advertised. So here you see on the left to what they call the Crawford Station, which was actually never built, and then over to the Oakley Station, and then down southward to downtown is what was going to be built with the original $6 million. Then they anticipated that above the top route through Norwood, through St. Bernard Norwood, was going to be built with the future phase. Now, I just showed you photographs of them building through that area. So the Rapid Transit Commission was not obligated to build what you see here. They could have not done anything also. On the left, we see a promo advertisement from a newspaper, Cincinnati's attention. The Queen City should be the first in Ohio. Vote for the interurban rapid transit bonds. They'll help some. Election day, April 25th, 1916. It then goes on to say, the strategy is sound, the funding strategy, all those things. On the right hand, we see another flyer from the same era. Interurban rapid transit for a greater Cincinnati means faster transportation to your homes and factories. Simple message. Then we see this circular shape here, which is a very unusual way of depicting a railroad. But you can see the arc to the top is the section that they weren't going to build with the original phase, as I showed in the previous one. And then you also see time. So to do the entire loop, we see 54 minutes, 10 seconds. The section that they were planning to build with the first phase was going to be 40 minutes and 17 seconds. On the left, we see the plan that I already showed you the cover of. That one's from 1912. On the right, we see one from 1914. The one on the right is very close to what was actually built. So on the left, we see a focus just on the interurban railroads. On the right, we see a switch of the strategy. So the strategy is a mixing of rapid transit trains and the existing interurban trains, although the real plan was to eventually change entirely to rapid transit trains, to kick all of the interurbans off this railroad once it was fully constructed. So if we go back to the full loop versus the partial, the plan was really to only allow the interurbans to travel on this railroad until the full circle was built. And then when the full circle was built, it'd all be kicked off. And then we'd have just rapid transit trains traveling every 3 minutes or so in each direction. So we see the plan on the left, which includes a downtown loop. So that's the earlier plan from 1912. The 1912 plan also shows the route going through Hyde Park, and that was going to be through an additional 1 mile tunnel. On the right-hand side, we see Hyde Park is deleted from the plan, and we see it traveling through a trench, which I-71 now runs through. We also see a line down toward the bottom, which hugs the Ohio River south of downtown, and that is the plan that was chosen. So they did not build the Mount Adams Tunnel. They did not build a downtown loop. So, the subway loop was the same concept as the Chicago L, but underground. And I know Philadelphia tried to build one, but didn't finish it. And one of the guys who worked on the 1914 plan was from Boston, the consultant, and he had worked on the Cambridge-Dorchester Subway in Boston, which opened in 1912. So Cincinnati's was built to what he knew, which were the specs of the Cambridge-Dorchester subway. So you could take one of today's red line trains on the left-hand side, put it in Cincinnati, and it would work with the platform heights, the loading gauge, all that. And also, I forgot to mention, the Cincinnati Rapid Transit Loop was going to be standard gauge. So there was sort of an issue with, they couldn't mix use of the subway and the existing streetcars. So here is a highlight. This is the plan from this is the map from the 1914 plan. In yellow is the plan that was chosen. You see the two alternate tunnels under Mount Adams. Neither of those were going to happen. The downtown loop was not going to happen. Here's where I find some problem with the plan. So I think this plan is very good because we introduce a station down by the riverfront where there's actually a lot going on, including streetcar transfers from Kentucky, and the old Pennsylvania Railroad station was there also. What I think is not good about this system is that, and what was actually built was the rapid transit tunnel was going to be right below the surface. And so what that meant is that in the future, if they wanted to do any streetcar tunnels, the streetcar tunnels were going to have to go very deep. So how do you resolve that problem? Well, we have, in Philadelphia, I know there's some shared streetcar and rapid transit tunnel, but I don't know the Philadelphia system very well. In San Francisco, they built a 4-track subway under Market Street in the 1970s, which combined the old streetcar, which was upgraded to light rail, on one level with the new rapid transit trains on another level. They could have done that in Cincinnati. They did not do it. Then also in San Francisco recently, they buried another one of the light rail lines, and it goes perpendicular to the pre-existing BART tunnel. And that tunnel has to go very, very deep. And so what this sort of did was it blocked the ability to do a real comprehensive streetcar tunnel in addition to the rapid transit tunnel. And it's really unclear how many streetcars this system would have taken off the road downtown had it been built completely. This is a map I drew. This is the very first thing I ever did in Adobe Illustrator back in maybe 2008, so I apologize, it's pretty crude. But this shows some of the concepts of the plan. So in red, you'll see, the rapid transit loop, the tracks that were going to be used by the subway trains. And then thin black lines, I show interurbans theoretically sharing the same tracks. We also see where the maintenance facility was going to be up at the top of the image. So the subway was going to use, the rapid transit loop was going to use the Cincinnati Street Railway's existing main car barn where they did the repairs and when they built streetcars also. It was going to share that. And then toward the downtown, we see the Ray Street Interurban Terminal. So that shape that I have of the platform is the shape of that platform now. So we already saw that under construction. You see the two very odd Y tracks. So one on one side, one on the other. And you can see that for the interurban trains actually use that center stub track and use the Ys that back out, they were going to have to block the rapid transit track. So it's a major flaw in the system. And I think it indicates that it was really just a temporary solution. To the left of that, you see a bunch of little tracks coming off. That was an underground freight terminal that was planned for a vacant lot. It was actually a fairly large vacant lot where a hospital used to be. I'm not really going to cover that because I just want to stay focused on the main part of the plan. There were also plans for an underground freight depot downtown, and there was one for on the surface up near the Ludlow Avenue station you see here. The dash line you see where it says Knowlton's Corner Elevated Station was an alternative plan that was presented in the late 1920s. It was going to improve upon what had already been built. You also see toward the bottom, Covington, Kentucky, and Newport, you see a block for Dixie Terminal. Dixie Terminal was the terminus of all of the Covington, Kentucky streetcars, and it was very conveniently located right next to where the Walnut Street subway was going to be and the main station of the new subway system. So there would have been a very easy way for people to transfer from the Kentucky streetcars onto the Cincinnati Rapid Transit Loop. Here's a close-up. Real quick, I want to mention over to the left, you see that one stray line. That was the one interurban that was not part of the Rapid Transit Loop because it hugged the Ohio River. Later on, they throw them a bone and say, hey, we're going to connect you to Dixie Terminal. I actually have a drawing of that you'll see later in this. And I have images of those Ys are both still there underground, by the way. They're very, very peculiar. And as I already mentioned, when I was 19 years old and I got in the subway for the first time and I saw those, I was like, were these supposed to be branch lines? What am I looking at? It was very, very confusing. And so even today, when they give tours of the subway on that station platform and you see those Ys, it's extremely confusing to people. Here we see on the left 1916, on the right a decade later exactly. So in yellow, you see what was finished and what was unfinished, and there was no further work done after 1926, 1927. So it's sort of frozen in time, except almost all of the above ground sections have been gnawed away at by expressways or other projects. And so they're very, very difficult to see. When I was young and I got interested in this and I tried to find the above ground route, it was very, very frustrating. I had a really hard time finding it. And in fact, I was wrong about a couple things. You also see on the 1926 map that a new terminus has been created at Madison Road, not quote unquote Oakley. So I kind of don't want to get too into that because we've got a lot of slides we still have to get through here. All right, so this is the one and only graph that I'm going to show you of anything financial. And you can see the year 1900 on the left, then 1916, all of a sudden things get hairy in 1917. So the budget that they had in 1916 was sound. It made sense. By 1917, everything got thrown off. And that was because of the First World War. And there was also a way in which U.S. municipalities were banned by the federal government from issuing municipal bonds. So Cincinnati couldn't even start on the project. So they had, passed the bond issue in April of 1916. Could have started on the project in 1917 if not for the First World War. So the project didn't actually start till 1920, and by then the inflation had really kicked in, really for the first time. If you know anything about railroad financing, they used to sell 50-year bonds back in the 1800s because inflation didn't happen, or at least they thought it was never going to happen. This is Cincinnati neighborhood map, and you'll see on the left-hand image where you see the word Cincinnati. That's not Cincinnati. That's actually the city of Norwood. And to the left is St. Bernard, another blank spot. So to this day, the city of Cincinnati has two donut holes in it formed by other cities. And you can see that the rapid transit loop over there on the right-hand side was set to go straight through it. So the rapid transit loop was built by the Rapid Transit Commission, which was not directly overseen by the city of Cincinnati. It was overseen by the county. But nevertheless, it was seen as like leverage to get Norwood and St. Bernard to join the city of Cincinnati. Well, it's now 2024, and they are still independent cities. So Cincinnati has this curiosity of these independent cities within it. It doesn't really seem to cause many problems, but it just seems to bother people. Now here we see the Cincinnati Interstate Highway map in 2024. It looks awfully similar to the rapid transit loop that you see in the map on the right, which is an ominous sign. And we'll get back to that in a second. Here's that same map from 1926. In red are the tunnels, in yellow are the surface sections. And later on in this presentation, I have newly found photos of the rapid transit loop, aerial photos from the 1940s that are really high quality. So I'll be able to show you things that I didn't know when I wrote the book. And here you see in red on the right-hand side, the path of the rapid transit loop of the actual construction. You can see how these interstate highways interfered quite a bit with the project. And you might ask yourself, well, why didn't they, when they built I-75 and these other ones, why didn't they leave space for the rapid transit loop? Great question. I mean, I've never been able to find any recorded conversation about that. It would have been very cheap to do so, and they didn't do it. And who is they? I don't even know who they was. Now here we're gonna take a closer look at the canal path. You can see here two different roads now occupy what was the Miami-Erie Canal. So Central Parkway, which is above the subway, and it makes that bend. So Central Parkway also includes the sort of left-right section. And then there's Eggleston Avenue. Eggleston Avenue occupies the section of the canal that connected through a series of locks with the Ohio River. So it actually steadily descends downward. Here you'll see it. So 540 feet at one point, 470. That's currently 470. The Ohio River used to be lower than it is now before it was dammed. So there was a series of many locks actually to get down to that. You also see spurs. So these were additional wharfage for the canal boats. And when Central Parkway was built, they actually sought out to extend Central Parkway onto those spurs because the parkway was funded by putting an assessment on neighboring properties. So they would have gotten actually more money to build the rest of the parkway, they thought, if they built the parkway needlessly onto these little spurs. Here's the whole route of the canal. Now you might ask yourself, why didn't Ohio keep the canal like New York State did? Or why wasn't the canal given over to a railroad early on? Well, I think the main reason why the canal wasn't given over to a railroad early on is because the canal itself went straight through the heart of many of the small towns along it. And so people didn't want steam locomotives roaring through the center of their nice town where there was a quiet canal before. And actually, we're going to see an example of that later with St. Bernard. And also to the bottom left, that canal you see going to the Indiana border, that is not actually the Miami-Erie Canal. I don't know why it's on this map, but it's not. So here are the towns, the cities and towns on the Miami-Erie Canal. And again, if the state of Ohio had given this all over to railroads, you would have had railroads going right through the main streets, essentially, of all these towns. So the state of Ohio did give away what became Eggleston Avenue to the railroads. So you can see a steam locomotive going through downtown Cincinnati here. This is probably around 1940. And that put the fear of God into the rest of the city of Cincinnati over not allowing the same thing to happen to the rest of the canal going right through the heart of town, which was very dense neighborhoods. And the same situation happened here as happened with the canal earlier, where the state still owned this land. And so the city was not able to enforce its municipal ordinances on railroads along this stretch. And so the railroads were free to just idle their engines. And there were situations where you'd have 1,000 or 2,000 feet of train sit there for a day. And you had kids crawling underneath the train to get to one side or another. And it was a bad situation. Here's some more street running just for fun in the Cincinnati area. So this is immediately across the river. So what we were just looking at is about a half mile from here. But this is a freight train in the late 1980s heading down Saratoga Street in Newport, Kentucky, directly across from downtown Cincinnati. So we had examples of this, right here in the area. Here's another train on that same route. This is in the mid 1980s. You actually see the Procter & Gamble headquarters under construction at the top right, and some other skyscrapers under construction. Many of those are being turned into apartments now. So here is the canal before subway construction commenced, and it used to extend to the right down what became Eggleston Avenue, what I was just showing. You can see the alignment here of the canal with Mount Adams, and you can see how there was a temptation to dig the tunnel, continue to bore a tunnel under Mount Adams here. And you can also see how wide the street is here as compared to Cincinnati's downtown streets. So there were a lot of advantages to this. So here's before and after. Here's another before and after from the same vantage point. When we see streetcars crossing the canal on the left and running flat. There was actually a little bit of a slope to all that had to be taken out when they built the parkway. You also see in the center of the parkway these boxes. Those are ventilation shafts, and those were there in the event that they decided to run a diesel work locomotive or even a steam locomotive. Well, I forgot about that. It wasn't diesel yet in the 1920s. So those are actually for steam originally and then later diesel. And even older, we see plans. Now this looks like Europe, but this is supposedly what Cincinnati was going to look like, with fine European style architecture lining the former canal. So the idea for running a railroad in the canal was an old one by the time the subway was actually built. It was already a 40 or 50-year-old idea. Here is the elbow of the canal. So this is where the canal and later the subway makes a dramatic 90-degree wheels screeching turn while approaching downtown Cincinnati. And this is right when the canal was drained. Straight ahead, you see a coal power plant. That coal power plant used water from the canal. And actually some other industries along the canal also used the water. So when the canal was drained, the city had to pay to restore their water service in some other way. Here is the elbow in 2010 from the air. And there you see Mount Adams in the background. You can see the temptation again to just route it straight through there and tell people to get off the train and walk from this point. The bulk of downtown is to the right. And here we go. So the never built Walnut Street Subway. So the Cincinnati has a subway, but it does not have a subway under Walnut Street. And Walnut Street is where, per the 1960 plan, the subway was going to be built. And you can see here a bustling American downtown. The streets are only 66 feet wide between property lines, so about 40 feet wide between the curbs. And by comparison, the east-west streets in Manhattan are 60 feet wide. So this is similar to New York City, the east-west streets in Manhattan, but with 6 more feet to spare. And you can see a streetcar there in the middle, caught in a scrum there. Here is plans for New York City style subway stations in downtown Cincinnati. So these stations, there were going to be 2 of them, were quite a bit different than the stations that were actually built under the canal. So these really look like New York City subway stations. They're, of course, right below the surface. There are multiple entrances. And in red is the Walnut Street Subway that was never built. So it's very, very short, only about 2,500 feet long. In white is the elevated section. So this elevated section was going to be similar to any elevated railroad in Philadelphia, New York, Chicago, Boston. And here you see the actual distance. My estimate was off. According to Google Earth, the distance of this subway was going to be 2,785 feet. And it was going to have 2 stations, which are going to be pretty close to each other. So it's going to be the sort of thing where you could probably look down the platform and actually see, the next station, kind of like how you can in Chicago. This drawing is from 1916. This is borings for the Walnut Street Subway that was never built. They had every intention of building the Walnut Street Subway first, and instead it never got built. You can see the heights above sea level. And here you see the bottom of the subway at roughly 520 feet generally. And getting back to my earlier point, if they were going to build a future streetcar subway, it was going to have to pass under this. So very, very deep. So again, I contend that's sort of a flaw in this plan. And here's this fantastic aerial photo I found of downtown Cincinnati. I found this recently. This is from about 1946, maybe. And there is the Walnut Street Subway emerging onto the white, which is the viaduct. And to the left, or actually immediately to the left, you can see the tracks of the Kentucky streetcars, which came across the old suspension bridge into a building known as Dixie Terminal. I alluded to that earlier in the meeting. And I didn't see explicitly a plan for an underground pedestrian connection between Dixie Terminal and the subway station, but presumably it could have been done. Here is the transition between the Walnut Street Subway and the L. So you can see here that the road actually goes down and the tracks were going to slope up at the same time. So it has kind of the look of like the legs of an ironing board. So, most L's come out of the ground where the ground is flat. So the climbing section is longer than it was going to have to be here.
Quick question about where those air survey photos are from.
Oh, well, they're from ODOT's website. And I actually have a link to, I show that later. And we're going to have more photos from that group of photos later on.
Great, thanks.
Okay. And so here in red, we see West End Rapid Transit Company, Anderson Ferry to Dixie Terminal. I talked about this earlier, which was the one interurban that was left out. So they were not invited to the party until now. And so you can see they're not going to share any track work with the Rapid Transit Loop at all, but they sort of threw them this bone like, hey, we'll get you into Dixie Terminal. So I seem to recall there was quite a bit of dialogue between the ownership of this interurban and the neighborhoods over there and the Rapid Transit Commission that I found in the records, but it's such a bit story that I didn't really investigate it very closely, so I can't speak about it with any specifics. Now we're going to look at the canal subway that is still there. So it's a little bit over 2 miles long. I guess you can call it the canal subway, or you can call it the Central Parkway subway. As I alluded to before, the subway was built in sections, and it was built by two different entities. It was built by the Rapid Transit Commission mostly, but then this section, the portals and about 1,000 feet south of here, were built by the Cincinnati Park Board. This is a picture of the subway this year. This is about 2 months ago. Somebody managed to break the door, and people were getting in the subway once again, just whenever they wanted. And so the city went and put that concrete barrier in front of the door that you see there. Now, I am told that you can still get in. If you're very, very skinny, there's a little bit of play in the door, and you can actually get in there. Right now, I did not try to do that. I've been in there enough times. I don't need to go again. All right, so this is the door right now to the Ray Street subway station. So as I mentioned before, there are 3 underground stations. And if you go down that door, this is what you see. So you see there were 2 entrances on opposite sides of Ray Street in the median of the parkway. And this is what's so confusing about it. When you go down there as a tour, you're like, what does the center staircase go down to? And the answer is it goes to future platforms that were never built. So what you're seeing here on the left and right were supposed to be in the interim, in the early phase, shared between rapid transit and the interurban trains. In a future incarnation, the rapid transit trains would be moved to the outer platforms that were never built, and this would be given over to the rapid transit trains entirely, everything you see here. So here's a diagram of that, and I found this diagram in a book from 1922, actually a magazine called the Engineering News Record, and this answered so many questions. I'll just let people look at it for a second, and I'll take a drink. So their top left diagram you see there in heavy black, you see what was actually built, what we just looked at in that previous photo. And then you see in dotted lines the future, the pedestrian underpass and future platforms, and then also new sidewalk entrances on the actual sidewalks of the platform, not in the middle. You also see there were going to be elevators for people with their luggage, because they thought that people were going to come in from long distances on these interurban railroads and have luggage with them. The top right diagram, we see those turnaround Ys. I'm going to have photos of those in a second. And you can see how the left Y goes underneath private property, which in itself is a hilarious story. It's still there. It's under a new building. And in the big diagram, we see from the top looking down. This is really like one of the big 4-track stations in New York City. And here you see, now I took these photos in 1999, I think, when I didn't know what I was doing. I was not a good photographer back then. And you see the provisions for those outer platforms here. So you can imagine in 1999, I and other people went down there having no idea what we're looking at here. So you just see, okay, they're going to build passing tracks, but why would they build passing tracks here? I didn't know that they were going to build these extra platforms. Then in addition to the through platforms, there were the 2 stub end platforms. And at the center here, you see one of the stub platforms. This is how the subway station looks now if you go down there for a tour. It's fairly dangerous because a lot of people go down there who, have vision problems or whatever, and it's, you can walk off the edge of this platform just like you can walk off the edge of any subway platform. So, and that would put the tour guides in a really bad spot, and they haven't had the tours in a couple of years. I'm not sure what the status is of it. So I took these photos for the book. I have a color insert in the book. The publisher only agreed to do a color insert if the photos were colorful. So I used blue and red gels and other lighting techniques to light up the tunnel. It doesn't look like this when you're there. It's just plain concrete. And here's the water main. We haven't touched on the water main yet. Well, I have a whole section just on the water main coming up. To the right, you see underneath the elbow that I've referenced several times. We've seen the elbow from the air. Here's the elbow in the ground. Now, it looks very sharp here, but it's really not that sharp of a turn, and the trains would have been going slow anyway because they're approaching a station. To the left, we see one of the Ys. So this is the Y that goes underneath private property to the left. Now, to get to that Y, if you want to take photos over there or just see it, you have to climb over that water main, and the water main is covered in dust, so you're going to get really dirty. And you can't crawl under it. There's not enough space. Also down there today, still to this day, is the brick wall. And I talked about this on the very first slide. On the left, you see the very first slide we saw, which is the train, the subway turning to go underneath Walnut Street. There is the brick wall, the temporary brick wall. It's still there 100 years later. And here is from the Y looking back out. So this is not one photograph. I took one or two photographs, maybe three, I can't remember, and stitched them together in Photoshop to get this panorama effect. You see the water main on both sides, and you can see that the trains would have to cross the active rapid transit tracks. You know, the interurban trains have to cross the rapid transit tracks to get to this and then back out. It's kind of a mess. It wasn't going to work well. And here is looking into the Y. So we're actually underneath a building here. So they had to tear down a building to build this Y, a very narrow building. They built it, then they sold the land above it, and a new building was built above it. And here you go. This is that picture. Here you can see a narrow building, maybe 30 feet wide to the right, being that has been demolished. That's the notch where the Y was built. And oh, actually, I can't read the notes because Kristen, the thing is blocking it. I can't read it. But anyway, so here you see a diagram of the Y on the left-hand side. Down at the bottom, you see those squares. That's a vent. So just the Y was going to have its own vent, which is very convenient. Very, very nice of them to do. And you can see in the conditions of the sale of the lot to the public that vent could not be covered. So whoever bought this they could build a building and they could build the foundation around it, but they could not cover that vent. Here's another drawing, and you can see the darker red color is where a foundation could be built for the new building. And then the dash section is where a building could not be built. So a ridiculous footnote in the history of the subway. Moving on, the Liberty Street Station. Here is the entrance to the Liberty Street Station, and this station has its own very odd history. Well, we'll get to that in a second. Here is the same door from looking up. And here you see the inside of the station. You can see chain link fencing and just odd looking construction over there on the opposite platform. And you can see the water main in the foreground. And you can see the entrance to the station from the sidewalk, and you can wonder what the heck are these cinder blocks in this. And so this is where the subway story, as it's told locally in barbershops and so on, gets very complicated, because there is more than a kernel of truth to the story that part of the subway was turned into a nuclear bomb shelter. So that really happened. So in the 1960s, Cincinnati received a small federal grant. It turned one side of this station into a quote unquote demonstration bomb shelter. So, you know, you're just below the surface of the street. I guess you'd survive a not direct hit. A direct hit, you're probably not going to survive. But this was actually decontamination showers. So in the event of nuclear Armageddon, you were to run through this nuclear shower, or this shower, to get the nuclear fallout off of you. Then on the right hand, well, there's actually a service truck was in there the day I took this photo. They've got some work lights up. Here are cots. I took these photos in 1999. There are cots in the subway station. So you can see this nuclear fallout shelter could house about 6 people. in cots and maybe a few dozen more on the platform. By the way, this space is the old bathroom. So um, two of the stations had, actually, the Liberty Street station had bathrooms on both sides. The Brighton station had bathrooms on one side. The Ray Street station, which we already saw, which was the biggest, had no bathrooms. And then if we look back to the first diagram I showed of the Walnut Street subway, those were going to have bathrooms in them also. So anyway, the bathrooms were never used, just like the, well, I guess some people have probably used the bathroom in the subway. Let's move on. All right, so here is, this bench is part of the ephemera from the fallout shelter, as is this teal paint. You see some strange lighting on the roof, some 1960s era lighting. And this is the other side of the Liberty Street station. There's nothing going on over here. So there's quite a contrast between the nuclear fallout side and the side that has not been touched. But you can see on that right-hand photo that they center blocked in the gaps between the two stations. So, you know, it's like so many subway stations, you can see across to people on the other platform. Well, that's how this was going to be too, until they put these cinder blocks in there in the 1960s. Okay, here's the Brighton Corner subway station. So the yellow you see at the bottom is covering the entrance to this station. And I just took this photo about 2 months ago. And we saw a black and white photo earlier, soon after this was built. And here's from the air. This is a odd corner of the city here. You can see how the canal hugged the hillside here. And the station is over to the right. And you can see how the tracks were curving as they came into the station on both sides. So none of the stations had curving or sloped platforms. So there was a modern system by comparison to some older systems. That was going to limit the ability of them to extend the platforms in the future, or maybe they would have had a curved platform in this station had they ever extended the platforms. And by the way, I forgot to mention, all the platforms were 300 feet long. So you know, Boston operates four car 70-foot 70-foot trains, 4 cars on the original Red Line. The Red Line stations have since been extended, so I think they run 6-car trains. So we would have 4-car trains of Boston Red Line trains had it ever been put into operation. This bridge you see here replaced an earlier bridge over the canal. Streetcars ran over this slope bridge, and one of the incline railroads was here on the left hand on this hill. And so you would have been able to walk out of the subway station, walk up the staircase you can kind of see on the hill, walk over and take the incline up to the top of the hill. So this was sort of a crosstown transfer point. Now on the Brighton station, this is one of my best photographs. The lighting just really worked out well here. So we're at the edge of the platform looking back toward the entrance to the inbound platform. And like I said, in Brighton, there are bathrooms on one side, but not the other. If we go back to this image, you can see how the subway was really crammed up against this hillside. So there wasn't space for the same elaborate entrance that the downtown bound side had. So this image turned out really well. I use a mixture of strobes and light painting on this. The camera's on a tripod, and the bathrooms are to the left and the right, but the entrances are actually from the hallway you can't see. This is the other end. You can see how sharply the tunnel turns as it enters the station on this side, and we're about to see on the other side also. So this is the other, looking in the other direction. The the track turned right away. We look at the subway vents. So the subway vents are almost their own topic in and of themselves. So the subway has 3 types of vents for the 3 different styles of construction. So these style vents, what we're looking at right here, they're from the Brighton station south to Liberty Street. And these were spaced pretty regularly. And they all had these built-in ladders. And I took this photo in 1999, and this was the last ladder that was intact. All the other ladders had been rusted away, at least partially or fully. And here you can see those vents from the, I took these photos earlier this year. And there are 50 or maybe 75 of these vents. They're regularly spaced. Then there are these vents. These vents are on the part of the subway that was built by the park board. So when I was a kid, you'd see these vents while passing on I-75, and I wanted to look in them so bad because I could only dream of getting inside the subway. There were no tours back then, but I just thought I just would learn so much by just being able to peek in there. And this is from maybe 2010. And then this is such a useful photograph. You see, again, the section of the subway built by the Parkway, which is almost like those snow barriers you see over railroads like in Switzerland, or actually some in the Rocky Mountains, where they're kind of containing the rapid transit tracks inside this box structure and then building a new road above it. It's almost like the roadway is the L. And you can see the neighborhood is right there, so this would help control the sound. And here are those vents being covered up. This is around 2010, so those vents cannot be viewed anymore. I don't know why they did this, but they did it. And then this is a poor quality image. I apologize. But on the right image, we see one of the original vents in the wide section of Central Parkway. So we saw one of those images earlier where I pointed out the big vents that were for a diesel, or actually steam, and then maybe later diesel locomotive. On the left-hand side, you can see where the Parkway was rebuilt, and when it was rebuilt, all those vents were taken out. They're not there anymore. And also the original light fixtures are gone too. So this is on the north-south section of the wide part of Central Parkway. So the elbow would be in back of us, and we are looking towards the Liberty Street station up a couple blocks. And you can see those box vents for the steam locomotives again. On the left, you see that blank section where there's no building. That's where the hospital was, and that's where the underground freight terminal was going to be. There are actually turnouts for that down there. I don't have any pictures of them. And this area looks completely different now. The new soccer stadium is off to the left. So if you come to Cincinnati and see the soccer stadium, you're right by this spot. All right, so here is one of the short tunnels, the Hopple Street Tunnel. It's called the Hopple Street Tunnel, even though it ran perpendicular to Hopple Street. And this tunnel was built by the Park Board, not by the Rapid Transit Commission. Same strategy as we saw further south, where it's sort of containing the subway. There was a complicated intersection above it. It was also containing the sound of the subway. In the right-hand image, I'm sorry, in the left image, you can sort of see those portals. So you see, if I go back, how this portal is shut. This portal was sealed off probably in 1960 or thereabouts, but the south portal was open until this year, until 2024. So you're always able to get into it until just January of 2024. But here's a picture of the portals that used to exist before they were sealed off. And here are the portals in about 2004. I think that's when I took this photo. And here are the portals this year. So you can't get in anymore unless you have a key. If I go back, it was wide open for my entire lifetime. And so the first part of the subway I ever went in was this. And you went in there was not a station or anything like that. So it's kind of anticlimactic, not very exciting. There were some homeless guys living around there, but I never saw anybody down there, so I never thought it was dangerous. But it was always fun when somebody came to the city. You could always show them these tunnels, this short tunnel, and you could go in there and kind of get a taste for what the main tunnel was like. It was identical dimensions. They had the concrete runners for the tracks. You can see this huge crack that is formed. I did not contact the city to see what the status of this is, but it's getting bad. I actually looked at an old photo, and it was starting about 20 years ago, but you can see it's really getting pretty bad. There's my hand next to it, so you can see they're going to have to do something here shortly. It doesn't look as wide as it actually is until you see a hand next to it. All right, Norwood. So up north, if you remember one of my earlier diagrams, there are two more tunnels. There were two more tunnels, also similarly small, and neither of them had stations. So here's one of them. I took this photo, I think around 2010, and you can see this one had been sealed up by then. I apologize for the gray bar. That is some sort of digital artifact or something that is unfortunately ruined a bunch of my old images. But here is a photo I took around 1999 or 2000 of that tunnel portal. So it was open back then. Here's a photo of it this year. So the building above it. So we see this building is gone. That was torn down. They moved to a new, it was called Zumbiel Packaging. They moved to a new place. Here's inside that tunnel. I took this photo again around 1999, I think, maybe 2000. Here's the other portal, and I apologize for the low quality. This is same time, around 1999. And a station was going to be built right here. We're going to see that later. So no stations were built in Norwood. No above ground stations were built. And here it is this year. So you can't see any sign of the tunnel portal anymore, except for the concrete railing up above. Here's a second tunnel in Norwood. So here it is under construction. And we saw in that initial wave of construction photos, them laying the foundation for this. And this one was sealed in the 1970s. I've never seen it with my own eyes. There it is now, no sign of it. So that ditch is gone. The building, that one building is still there. And here on the right-hand side, you'll see the entrance to that same subway tunnel that's also gone. You also, in the left image, is one of the overpasses. This is in the 1950s, so the cars are all pretty cool. And then the aerial imagery we're about to show, late 1940s. So if you go to ODOT's website, they have a plugin you can download into Google Earth, and it's a little tough to get working, but I got it to work, and it's huge. It's got all kinds of stuff in there, and it's free. You don't have to pay for it. So I know I'm sort of giving away my secret here, but here's one of those images, and this is from the late 1940s. And I don't expect people from here to be able to pick out what we're looking at here, but Central Parkway is to the right going up and down, and then we have a new road, the Western Hills Viaduct, going all the way across the valley. And if we go back to the very early diagrams, we see a railroad that was over on the west side of this viaduct that was wanting to get into the subway. And this bridge was built in 1932. I think that's when it opened up. And there is, on the lower deck, there are streetcars, but this is the upper deck, what you can see from this aerial image. And there's no provision for any other kind of train to enter the subway, even though you can see it intersects with it directly. And up to the right, you'll see the subway portals surrounded by this yellow circle. Those are the portals we saw. These are the portals to the main tunnel. And then right through the middle of this image, I-75 is there now. We'll see that here in a second. Here we see the Marshall Avenue subway station. And today, if you go there, it's kind of hard to understand why there was a station there, but you can see it was a very dense neighborhood at the time, with the exception of the hillside. You can also see there was an overpass immediately south of the station. And because trains would have to stop here, they would have crossed that overpass at a very low speed, and so it kind of kept the noise down. There were earlier proposals where the park board was going to basically build a subway tunnel the entire length of this whole stretch and keep the sound contained, and so that Central Parkway could be built on a straight alignment. You can see the curve down there. If, like I said earlier in the presentation, if you drive 45 miles an hour on that curve, it doesn't look like it, but you're going to wreck your car. Oh. And here again, that same picture again, it's just so useful. You see the, oh, I think I left this picture in there by mistake, but you can see when we look at it here again, the streetcar tracks off to the left, you can see Central Parkway paralleled Central Avenue. So that's no joke. It's one of the great quirks of the Cincinnati road layout. We have a Central Parkway and a Central Avenue, and they parallel each other. They're right next to each other. And here they're like literally right next to each other. This section of Central Avenue is now gone. So those earlier photos I was showing with events that are just on dirt, that's just grading for I-75 now. And here you see I-75 under construction. To take this in for a second, it's pretty dramatic. You can see Central Avenue still sort of crossing the construction site diagonally. And here's how you see how the subway was starting to bit by bit, the neighborhoods and things are starting to eat away at what the subway was built for. And so actually activating it on its original alignment made less and less sense. Here's an aerial image from the late 1940s. Now, you'll be able to see the two overpasses for the rapid transit loop going through the woods there, and here I'm about to circle them. So on the left hand, the left circle is the Clifton Avenue subway station. And this is the only one of the surface stations that was partly built over a road, sort of like a elevated New York or Philadelphia or Chicago elevated station. So you can see how the platform actually overhangs Clifton Avenue. To the right is just a simple overpass for Mitchell Avenue. What's really mysterious about this decision, and I was never really able to figure out why they did this, but you can see there's not a lot going on over there on the left-hand side where they actually built that station. I believe that station was built for two reasons. One was one of the interurbans was going to be extended to it. Number two, instead of an earlier plan, so they were going to have the station for that, and so that the Cincinnati streetcar workers could access the car shop, which is right there at the center. And then, but there was no streetcar line on Clifton Avenue. That's actually a very steep hill. You can't tell from this image, but it is. Whereas to the right at Mitchell Avenue, there was actually a streetcar line on that, so it made a little bit more sense for there to be a transfer. So I really don't know why they chose that one versus the other. And then here in the center, as I mentioned, this is the main shop facility for the Cincinnati Street Railway. It was going to be shared with the rapid transit loop. And according to something I read, but I never found a picture of it, they actually laid some dual gauge track there to be shared by the rapid transit loop trains and the streetcars when they were kind of reconfiguring the shop in the 1920s. Here's before and after, 1946 versus 2023. This is part of the reason why it's just so hard to understand the subway concept. There's just nothing left of the above ground sections in so many areas. I mean, there's just nothing. And you can see the shops have been, the streetcar shops are now a Kroger and a Ford dealership. Here's the aqueduct of the Miami-Erie Canal over the Mitchell Avenue bridge, over Mitchell Avenue. And so we have in this one location, I'm showing you this now because in this one location, now this is an update, where there formerly was a canal aqueduct, a bridge, there was a rapid transit bridge that never got used, and then I-75 under construction in 1957. So you also might ask, how was I-75 under construction in 1957 if the highway bill was passed in 1956? The answer is that it was actually under construction under an earlier name. It was called the Mill Creek Expressway, and there's the Mill Creek right there. And it was under construction to be a toll road, in the early 1950s, and the highway bill passed. Suddenly the states were flush with cash. It was never made into a toll road. So Ohio has a turnpike, an east-west turnpike that connects Pennsylvania with Indiana. As far north as Cincinnati, it doesn't affect us at all. There are no toll roads anywhere close to Cincinnati. So here we see the rapid transit bridge in the bottom left corner. It was never used. And you can see that, the tracks from construction vehicles using that bridge to go back and forth. And we see the I-75 overpass under construction. And then we see the streetcar shops yet again. So by this time, the streetcars were all gone. I think the streetcars stopped running in 1951. Those might be some streetcars sitting in front of it over there on the right-hand side. I'm not sure. There's definitely a bus above it. Okay, so in yellow, this is one of the aerial photographs. We see the rapid transit right-of-way in faint yellow. I'm going to point out some details. So here again is the Mitchell Avenue overpass and two cemeteries. So there's the streetcar shop again, which we just saw. There's the Mitchell Avenue overpass. And again, you can see part of the argument against building a rapid transit station here is that the cemeteries, the creek, they're all, they couldn't develop the cemeteries, obviously. The creek flooded like crazy. And I think, I I would bet that the shops were underwater in the 1937 flood. Now I think of it, I've never read that though. But you can see that land is very flood prone on the opposite side. All right, now we're in the city of St. Bernard. So to this day, what we're looking at is still an independent city. It's still completely surrounded by the city of Cincinnati. And you ought to be able to see the canal path through here. And they really didn't do any work here on the rapid transit loop. So you might ask, why did they not do it here? You think there's like a holdup with the city or something like that? I think the issue here, and this would require further research, that would mean going up to St. Bernard and looking at their records and stuff, because it's probably in their meeting minutes and stuff back in the 1920s. But I think that the Rapid Transit Commission, to save money, was going to build basically a surface and elevated route through here. But St. Bernard wanted it to be underground. And you can see here why. I mean, it's going straight through the heart of town. So also the Rapid Transit Commission tried to build a diagonal route through here. And you can see, obviously, to build diagonally and to cut this corner, they were going to have to take out a bunch of houses. So there might have been objections over that. It's also hard to see from this how the terrain undulates. So there's some hilliness here that makes it hard to explain why they were making the decisions they were making. But suffice to say, there was no actual permanent construction in this area like there was both to the left and to the right. So there were no overpasses, no underpasses in St. Bernard. Now we've moved on to Norwood. Now this aerial image is diagonal. It's not north and south. So it's kind of disorienting. But in yellow is the path of the rapid transit loop. Everything you see here was graded. We're going to zoom in here. So this is when I showed those early construction photos, and we saw the line being built through just the country. This is where it was. It was out here in this area. So we see the St. Aloysius Orphanage. It's still there to this day, up at the top. And they had a farm surrounding the orphanage, and they had their own food and stuff like that up there that they grew on their own farmland, and they sold off some of that farmland, and that's where this neighborhood came from. We see what was called the Twin Drive-In. So that's a drive-in movie theater at center with two drive-ins. And we see one of the rapid transit loop overpasses. That's Reading Road. Then we see the portal for the Section Avenue Tunnel. This is one of the two short tunnels in Norwood. And here's the center of Norwood. I'm not sure what that factory was in the middle. But we see the north portal and the south portal of that short tunnel, which just goes underneath that street. And then we see Montgomery Road Station. There's also the road that comes at a shallow X and forms a shallow X with it is called Carthage Avenue. That's since been cut off, so it doesn't meet in the same way anymore. So you had basically, if you see there, like a really wild 5- or 6-way intersection right next to the railroad tracks. So it was kind of a mess. But the Montgomery Road Station, you can see, very logical location for a station. And then here we have in East Norwood, there's that same station location, Montgomery Road. Then there was going to be a station over here. This is where the baseball field was that I showed in an earlier photograph. And then here's that tunnel, the Harris Avenue Tunnel, which was not going to have an underground station. The station was going to be a surface level station on where the ball field is. All right, so Western Hills Viaduct and Columbia Parkway. On that report from 1912 under bullet point 3, we see your attention is further directed to the obvious connection over the Queen City Avenue Viaduct to Westwood. Well, that viaduct had been contemplated back in 1912. It wasn't built until 1932, 20 years later. It's still called the Western Hills Viaduct. It's a 2-level viaduct. And the plan back then was that maybe you could have built a viaduct for roads and to allow, it actually wasn't technically an interurban, one of the commuter railroads over there, to pass into the subway from that point. And here's the Western Hills Viaduct as built. Now this thing only has a few years to live. So if you come to Cincinnati, go check it out. It's about 90 years old, and it's going to be torn down in the next couple of years. Here it is being built toward Central Parkway. So here we see sort of why Central Parkway was built elevated over the subway. It was to be flush with this future planned viaduct. And there it is. So you can see that the lower level of the viaduct, and this is why it's such an interesting structure, the lower level comes down and it had streetcars on it, and it comes down to Spring Grove Avenue. The upper level continues on to Central Parkway. You can see here that they could have, extended at ground level and basically come into the subway with streetcars, but we'll get to that later, why streetcars weren't used in the subway. And then on the opposite side of town, this dramatic photo from around, it's probably around 1935, maybe 1937. You see another viaduct, different style of construction being built right into downtown. And that street you see at the bottom is Eggleston Avenue. You see, I think, some sort of rail car down there, and that is that railroad that was on the canal that I talked about earlier in the presentation with the steam locomotive going under it. And here is the viaduct closer to completion. This is still there, and it's gonna. There are no plans to replace this viaduct, so it's going to be there for a long time, presumably. And in the distance, you see 3rd Street, and that's where the subway's L was going to go over that street and up, basically to where this camera took this photo. So you see, by the mid-1930s, a physical conflict with the rapid transit loop. And here is Columbia Parkway. So this parkway was built during the Depression, mostly with federal funds. And it took the route that the subway was going to take on the east side of town. So we see the hill, Mount Adams, to the left, where the Eden Park Reservoir is, where the arches and the lake is. That's where the Mount Adams Tunnel was going to emerge, directly in alignment with the old part of the canal that was still going in 1920. I'll direct your eyes also to a pair of tracks running alongside the parkway toward the center of the image. That was a new streetcar alignment that was built as part of the parkway. Now, I've never been able to find out, and I could look it up, it would take a while, but if there was some sort of plan for that streetcar right away to be taken over by the rapid transit loop at some point, maybe, I don't know. I don't know the answer to it. Here's another view of the new parkway. You see an absolutely crazy intersection there. It was a terrible idea at the time, and it was replaced maybe 20 years later with an overpass. And you see those streetcar tracks. Here are the streetcar tracks again, since this is a streetcar organization. I showed you this photo. And here is in 2010 from a helicopter looking back. And so you can see how the route of the subway out of downtown on an L was going to happen, but it's now an interstate highway. So everything became physically blocked. It was no longer possible to do it the way it had been planned. Now this section, completion attempts after 1930. This reads a panoramic view of Cincinnati showing the proposed city subway by the Cincinnati Transportation Survey. So Cincinnati got money from the federal government to do a transportation survey. I think probably most cities did, and they spent money on, hey, let's do a streetcar subway. Let's use part of the rapid transit loop, the section that's been finished already, and run streetcars through it instead, and then build the downtown streetcar loop that I kind of pointed out was sort of a flaw with the plan from the beginning. And so in this example, if you're not going to run rapid transit trains, you could do the streetcar loop directly underneath the city streets. I'll also point out that this loop plan was different than the original one. So this one wanted to use Race Street instead of Plum Street. So Plum Street is the north-south street that's in line with the canal. And I think that was used originally because it was in alignment with the, you could have a simpler junction, I guess. And then what you see here, you guys wouldn't know this not being from Cincinnati, but at the time, Race Street was where most of the department stores were. And so I think the department store owners wanted to bring any streetcar subway, right to their doorstep. And here we see streetcars funneled into both the rapid transit loop surface sections and into the finished subway section, and then down at the bottom you see the subway loop under downtown that we saw in the prior image. It's kind of fun to look at. So you have 3 or 4 major streetcar routes funneled into the subway. So that obviously happens in Philadelphia. It happens in Boston still to this day. There's also an outline for entrances into the downtown streetcar loop from those east side neighborhoods. You can kind of see them down there close to downtown, and another one on 7th Street. We also see right-of-way for the interurbans. In this image, this is one of the few pieces of interurban right-of-way that's still around. So all the interurbans went out of business in the 1920s, with the exception of this one. So this one is the one that went up to College Hill. And I think it was still active until around 1940. And actually, my grandmother remembers these trains and remembers riding them. So only one of the 8 or 9 interurban railways survived the Great Depression, or survived the meltdown. Here's one of them over here. And I brought this up because you'll see this interurban was going to join the rapid transit loop near the proposed Madison Road station. And I really didn't talk about this section at all until just a couple minutes ago. And you see this tunnel here, and that was going to be a bored tunnel, and that was going to be the only bored tunnel on the system. And I always kind of I didn't know quite where it was until recently, because I just didn't pay attention to this part of the section, even when I was writing the book. Turns out this was built under private property because a private street, so you're not even allowed to go on the street that was built above it, and there are a bunch of mansions that were built around 1915 in this section, and up until 1920. So if I go back to this, you know, the cost of the rapid transit loop was going up because things were encroaching on it, and none of this east side right-of-way had been secured. So all of a sudden, if they were going to try to build the east side route, they're going to have to take a lot of property through eminent domain. They weren't going to have to before. All right, so here's the Ludlow Avenue station. This is where, you know, imagine streetcars going through this. They were going to have to rebuild all the stations. And I bring that up because here's a plan to divert the rapid transit loop from that point, which is at the top of the Ludlow Viaduct, and into North Side, which is a much lower neighborhood. So they're going to have to build, you know, a couple thousand feet of track work to bring the station closer to where people actually were, and to where more streetcar transfers were. So you can see the rapid transit line, 540 feet above sea level, 490 feet above sea level. So if they were going to run rapid transit trains, they're going to be going down 50 feet abruptly and then back up 50 feet, putting a lot of wear and tear on the vehicles, on the trains. And then also they're getting into the flood zone. So I kind of this wasn't a good idea. The more expensive thing was to do an L through North Side, but that was going to be very expensive. All right, extensive subway repair work in 2010. And you can see in 2010, the subway was repaired, the existing, the 2-mile station, the 2-mile tunnel, I'm sorry. So here's a helicopter view in 2010. Drones weren't invented yet. So yours truly paid a helicopter pilot $400 to fly around Cincinnati and photograph things. And here you see the subway tunnel exposed from the air. And here you see an access point where they decided to repair this entire section of tunnel for a couple feet, I guess, where it deteriorated, probably where there was a section break between the different contracts, because each section, there were 4 contracts, and there's sort of an ugly joint where each contract was built because they built in different styles. Direct your attention to the middle. You'll see 2 conduits, and those are actually fiber optic cable that was installed around 2000. So the fiber optic line had to be preserved during this reconstruction work. Here's a section of the original subway, and they report it. This is another access point, and this is actually the access point I used to take all the photos. So this access point was open, like how you see here, for about 6 months. And I went down there 4 or 5 times. That's how I was able to go down repeatedly, take and retake photos until I got them right. I actually took a 6-foot step ladder down with me, and I used that step ladder to get up onto the station platforms. And I actually took a lot of the photographs from an elevator perspective using that ladder. So a lot of the images that I took, including the one on the cover of my book, the one that Kristen used in the promo for this, those are taken at about 8 feet above the ground level of the subway. So here is the conduit with the fiber optic in it, and that's also one of the joints between the contract sections. So to your left, you see smooth concrete. To the right, you see that they used wooden forms. So I think they used steel forms to the left, that would be my guess, and they used wooden forms to the right. Oh, and of course, the 1958 water main, it's still there. So the water main is very old at this point, but still going. So one night, I think it was the fourth or fifth night, I took photos for the book through that access door. I heard a sound I hadn't heard before, and I came upon this. So the water main was actually spraying water out of this release valve, and it was, you know, hundreds of gallons per minute. I mean, just tons and tons of water coming out of the thing. And I got to see how the drainage works in the subway. So, like I said early on, really the very first slide, the subway is very high in altitude. It's 540 feet above sea level typically. And it just has regular grates in the bottom, and that allows water just to drain out into the sewer system. So there's no active pump anywhere. Somebody sent me this after I wrote the book, so this is something that's not in the book. This was an advertisement in an engineering or trade magazine of some kind of the men installing the water pipe. So here are some details on the pipe when it was installed. And you see those gantry things they're using to install the pipe. Those things are still down there. They left them down there. There's one of them. So this is the original thing that helped install the pipe. And here is a repaired section of pipe. And here is a new gantry of some kind they used, I guess, just to bring that one section of pipe into the subway. Here is the pipe back in 1999 with one of the vents still open. That section of the subway was kind of weird to go into because you'd see the light coming in, but it really wasn't enough light to like really see anything. But it made me think about what it was going to be like to ride the subway in that section. You'd kind of know you were getting to the portals because you'd see natural light. Here's another detail of that of the water spraying out, and you see just the volume of water was high. I took these photos with remote strobes, and luckily the remote control strobes worked underground as long as I was line of sight. You could be, I think, slightly out of line of sight, and they didn't work. You had to be able to pretty much see the flash for it to work because the concrete's so thick down there. All right, so here's the water main downtown. So this is the Race Street station. This is the main station, the interurban station. And you can see the way that the water main snakes through the station, and it goes toward the other Y. So I showed you pictures of the one Y earlier that goes under private property. This one does not. But again, if you explore the subway illegally, you've just walked 2 miles to this point. Now you're into this crazy looking station you can't figure out. And if you want to see even more tunnel, you've got to climb on your stomach over this giant plastic covered water pipe. And then when you get to the other side, see the brick wall and come back, you've got to climb over the plastic again. And it was so hard to figure out what the heck you're looking at. I mean, without that diagram that I showed earlier on in the presentation. All right, now we're to the last section. We only got maybe 10 more slides. So subway oddities. Vandals remove rations from old subway tunnel. This is from 1981. You see, somebody sent me this. So there used to be in the nuclear fallout shelter a bunch of food and water in these canisters. And as people got into the subway, they took them out as souvenirs. And so you see one here in somebody's apartment, and he sent me this photo. This was 20 years ago. Here's a flooded section of the subway. So I just mentioned the way that the subway has grated, grates in the floor, and that's where the water naturally drains out. Well, every once in a while, it does clog up because there's a lot of dust in the subway. And so a section will actually fill with water up until it gets to the middle divider, and then it goes over into the other side. And it never gets more than maybe 18 inches deep. Here's an old steel Hudipole beer can. So Hudipole was a Cincinnati beer brand. It actually still exists, but it's not under the original ownership anymore. So I think this is, well, there's metric system on it. I'm not sure how to date this can. This might be from 1980, maybe 1990. All right, so this is the center of the Parkway directly above the center of the subway. I took this photo this year, and there was a pedestrian bridge that was built in the 1970s, I think, over the parkway in this point. And you can see how the legs of this pedestrian bridge are not centered. And the reason is because that's where the divider wall is for the two tubes of the subway. So if you go down in the subway, and I don't actually have a photo of it, I wish I did. I'm really kicking myself for not taking a picture of this. But the legs of that continue to the floor of the subway. So the legs of this pedestrian bridge continue really another 20 feet to the floor of the subway. And here are people in the subway recently. So people have sent me these pictures. The one on the left is in the 90s. One on the right is this year. So people are still finding ways to get in there, and actually you see one of the ventilation ladders behind the people on the right. So people endlessly ask me how to get in the subway. If you want to know if you're super skinny, you can get into the subway right now because the city has not done a good job sealing off its super heavy steel door. They have not fixed the lock on it. And the end. So I have two things one thank you here is for a guy here in town who has a very exhaustive website on the history of the interurban railroads and other railroads and other things around Cincinnati. You can find it by simply Googling Cincinnati Interurban Railroad. It'll come right up. His name, and I'm going to mispronounce it because he has an unusual last name, I believe is Jeffrey Jakiuk. I hope I pronounced it correctly, or Jakiuk. I'm not sure how to pronounce it. And then there is me. So this is my book. If you go on Amazon and you type in Cincinnati Subway and maybe my last name also, Mecklenborg, you'll get the thing for the ad for the thing. And I think they have a version for Kindle also. I'm not sure. And I think somehow they were selling a hardcover book too. I'm not sure how that's possible. I didn't publish it in hardcover. I've never seen the hardcover version. I think it's print on demand. But that's it. And maybe Kristen will come back. Kristen, are you there? Are you still alive?
Yeah, I'm here. That
Okay.
was awesome. In just a minute, we're going to get to questions and answers. But first, I want to let folks know what's coming up here. So, Jake, if you want, you can scroll through some of the comments while I let folks know what's coming up next at the museum. But in a minute, we'll let everybody unmute themselves and get to it here. So,
I gotta get a drink of water real quick. I'll be back in a minute.
Okay, great. So thank you to Jake and thank you to everybody for joining us tonight. That was awesome. Can't wait to get to the discussion here. But first, just want to let everybody know that we do have a program coming up in May. It's kind of a snapshot in time, April 1971, Streetcars in Pittsburgh from David Warner. And then June 5th, just before the D-Day anniversary, we'll have Rails to Victory, Allied rail operations in Europe after D-Day from Hans Altena, who will actually be presenting from the Netherlands. It'll be super late at night for him, so we're grateful for that. And then I mentioned earlier the West Penn Trolley Meet, and we've got some more interesting things coming up too. So stay tuned for links to registrations for those. We will get those up shortly. Let's see. So I'll leave it on this slide here. You can always support the Pennsylvania Trolley Museum at patrolley.org/support. There you can make a donation to us or become a member or a volunteer. After all, it is National Volunteer Week. And let's see, Jake is not back quite yet.
I'm back.
Oh, there he is. So let's see. I did have some questions come in from Gary Solomon. Did they ever design the vehicles? What kind of thought was put into vehicles for the subway?
Well, I actually skipped over some of that just for time.
Okay.
And actually, a big point that I failed to make was, why does the subway not have tracks? Why does it not have an electrical system? Why were the stations not outfitted? The answer is that there was a really complicated legal situation where the Cincinnati Street Railway was going to have capital obligations. So the Cincinnati Street Railway was going to operate the subway, not a separate entity. And it was also going to use its ability to borrow money against its revenue to do all that. So as the streetcar revenue started going down in the 1920s because ridership, I'm not sure what the peak year was, but ridership started going slightly down, and so they could borrow less and less money as that went on. So then it became more and more the city's obligation to borrow the money to finish the loop. And So the cars, I think I said, would have been identical to what was operating on, the Boston T on the Red Line.
Okay. Um, and then there was also some discussion in the chat about what the power source would have been. So maybe when the interurbans were using it, would it have been overhead?
Oh, I know that's such a complicated issue. And
Yeah, and
there
then
were issues with
third
like,
rail.
the whole interurban thing. Like I said from the very beginning, the plan was to eventually kick the interurbans out, and I'd say maybe not let them in even to begin with, and because each one of them ran their own electrical system, in addition to having different track gauges, different platform heights, no platform height, all those kind of things. So there were like a lot of issues. There was even one I remember reading that it had a signaling system that had some sort of shoe that came down that would have conflicted with the rapid transit loop's electrified third rail. So there were things like that. Now, it would have been possible if they ran via two overhead wires to operate completely independently. And in fact, Cincinnati streetcar system was one of the only ones in the world that ran completely via overhead wire, which is one of the curious details of Cincinnati's system. And when the streetcars came over from Kentucky, they actually had to raise a second pole and become a Cincinnati streetcar for a few hundred feet. So, it was going to be the Boston Red Line. I think they were throwing everybody a bone. Hey, the interurbans are going to share this with us. And I think the period when it was shared with the interurbans was going to be very brief.
Okay. And then just for your notes, some folks, let's see, commented when you were, I think in Norwood, the factory near the drive-in was Globe Warnicki.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah, I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that right, but
Okay. And also GM had a big factory there too. I forgot to point that out.
okay.
So, it was the Wild West. It was the country when it was under construction, and you can see a lot of big stuff, came in. So what they predicted for that area did come true. And the because the way Cincinnati is laid out, everybody knew where industry was going to expand. It was all going to expand in that area. So it wasn't, just lobbed out in some random direction.
Sure. Let's see. I think you mentioned this before, but we had a question about how much space is under that pipe, the water main. You said you can't crawl under it, right?
I wouldn't advise it. I mean, I'd say some people probably can. I don't know why you do that when you can crawl over it. You can get dirty either way, but I think you're going to get less dirty crawling over it.
Okay. Fascinating. Getting lots of nice comments in the chat. People from all over the US were watching, so that's really great. So I have allowed everybody to unmute themselves. So if you would like to pipe in with a comment or question, you should be able to unmute.
You didn't know
Edward.
who I was because
Oh, sorry. Phil, I think you got cut off there.
There was lots of farm work, gardening, cooking.
Oh, I think he's supposed to be cut off. Okay. So Edward Kohler, you have your hand up.
Yeah, good evening, Christian. Good evening,
Hi.
Jake. Jacob, I just want to thank you for a very good presentation. I've read the 9-part series on Cincinnati trolleys, and
My
it
girlfriend
really
took me to a strip club on a Friday night, and
doesn't really go into the subway too much. But I just want to thank you for a great presentation on something that I and probably a lot of other people here tonight didn't know. And Kristen, as always, thank you for taking the time and trouble to organize these things.
All right.
Sure.
Thank you.
Thank you. Let's see. Do we have any questions that popped up? I'm trying to scroll through the chat here. Look, there were some questions during the presentation that I was going to write down, but other people answered them. So that
Really?
worked out.
Okay.
Mostly, yeah, Jeffrey was super helpful. So shout out to Jeffrey for jumping in with answers to a lot of the questions in the chat. Yeah, there was some question about the Eggleston Avenue, or not Eggleston, is it Avenue, Street, whatever, what that railroad was, like who it belonged to, like Lebanon and Northern or Pennsylvania Railroad.
Yeah, it connected the CL&N yard with the Pennsylvania tracks. I don't know how much it was really used. I mean, it was not a main line. I mean, it was I think they were just shunting cars back and forth between it for the most part, not really running any through trains.
Yeah.
It was
And
connecting track between the Pennsylvania yard and the CL yard up where the casino is now. That was a rail yard up there. So that was the connecting track between those two yards.
So
and
you
then
probably saw probably saw something like transfer freights only.
let's see, there was a suggestion from Paul Grether. He thinks maybe the vents that were down the middle of Central Parkway maybe were just for fresh air and to mitigate the piston effect of the moving trains rather than
yeah, that's true. That's true. But also they explicitly plan to do the underground freight depot, and there is in some text that was not on the advertising for the project, but there is, that they would occasionally run, a coal powered, switcher through there. And then later they actually had a vote, and I didn't get into this at all, and I actually haven't researched this part of it at all, but in the late 1940s, there was actually another vote to use the subway as a freight depot, to actually use it for that purpose, and it passed. And there was actually some equipment purchased for that, including a diesel locomotive. So, I don't know how long you can let a diesel locomotive idle in a tunnel without any forced ventilation. I mean, all that was, there was no electric fan in any of those or anything like that. But I assume if they were really going to do a lot of work down there with diesel locomotives, they'd actually have to put fans in there and not just, wait for the, air to clear out by itself.
Paul, I saw you briefly had your hand up. Did you have another comment? Sorry.
Yeah, Jake, great presentation. Thank you. Good to see you too.
Nice to see you.
Yeah. Have you ever read anything about how some of the traction syndicates that were in Cincinnati, there were some very powerful investors, I think back, the turn of the century, the teens, the 20s. They built the traction building right downtown. Like the Cincinnati Street Railway was actually leased through a syndicate. Like there was all this money. They built the car builder, Cincinnati Car Company, right, to build cars for their traction syndicate controlled interests. So you would think that they would have some type of vested interest in this project being successful, right? They would have built rapid transit equipment. They would have presumably gotten money to operate the system, tapped into new fare revenue. And you never really hear the perspective of the transit operator in all of this. And like, where were they in all these debates?
Well, I'll tell you, up at UC's Bleegan Library, there are like boxes full of these letters going back and forth between the interurban owner, and like there's just so much of it. How much are you as a researcher, how much time are you going to spend reading every single last letter? And the thing is, when you're doing research, sometimes you just find something and it's the answer and you just can't believe it. But for the most part, you're finding answers to questions you didn't even know you had. So am I going to spend 2 weeks up there reading every one of those letters? And there's really a lot of it. There was like the one interurban that went from Indianapolis to, I think, Rushville, Indiana, or Connorsville, Indiana. And like they had, these railroads had big plans to come into Cincinnati through new entrances, and they were going to try to go through them and the guy along the river were going to go through the Western Hills neighborhoods, cross the Mill Creek Valley where the Western Hills Viaduct was built, and come into the subway. I mean, that was absolutely something that was on the radar for really happening. Now, another comment is, I think that people today don't understand. So some railroad people do, of course, but 100 years ago, many of the smartest people were all working in the railroad. So that's smartest guys in finance, smartest engineers for design, all that kind of stuff. And, they were, a lot of those people are now doing computer stuff or, working for, NASA or something like that. But it's like, you see, I just think the ingeniousness and the ambition these people had it was boundless, and just none of them accurately anticipated, just how quickly the financial aspect of all this would start eroding the second the car appeared as a competitor.
Did you ever encounter, like Keenan's book on the Cincinnati and Lake Erie talks a lot about Dr. Thomas Conway, and the whole kind of rebuild of Ohio Electric, the creation of the CL&E, and and the rebuild of the system. Really, a lot of that was based around Cincinnati and access to the subway, the Red Devil cars with the subway doors, etc. Have you ever read anything about like Conway's influence in Cincinnati or
No, I haven't. And I mean, you're familiar with how the city's laid out. I mean, for everybody from Pennsylvania, I mean, that hasn't been here. I mean, everything here was as complex from a logistics standpoint. And what that means is when you have ravines you can't move and stuff like that, everybody knows what you need to make that connection. And so it's really easy to get in the way of somebody. And then that's why eminent domain was necessary for anything to happen. But also a lot of money got thrown at bad ideas. Or just too many, interurban is expanding in every direction. Well, if you thought the car was never going to happen, then it made sense. But then all of a sudden you've got 8 or 9 of these things all going after this mysterious future growth. I mean, it's like investing in a stock for future growth instead of dividends.
There was something else going on in Cincinnati at this time. In 1929, they complete canalization of the Ohio River. Hoover comes to Cincinnati and unveils the big monument up in Eden Park.
Yep.
And Cincinnati thinks that they're going to become a major river port with all these packet boats and everything running up down the river. So they're investing money in the public landing and wharf boats and everything. And of course, 3 days after Hoover unveils the monument is the great stock market crash and everything. So there's Cincinnati's throwing this money at a lot of different things, including Lunken Airport, which I think is the first commercial airport owned by a city. So they're doing a lot of things. And they may have spread their money too many places and not concentrate on one thing.
Well, and also there were proposals to build a barge canal in Cincinnati, and so what we just to canalize the Mill Creek or even canalize the Great Miami River, which Cincinnati wouldn't have liked because that brings all that future traffic you're talking about away from downtown by about 10 miles. So I know exactly what you mean. I think at that time, with technology improving in so many ways and so many really ways that are obvious to us now, they weren't able to accurately anticipate what was going to happen. And
Jake, one more question, if I can. In the debt service that was used to build, all these bond issuances, have you ever seen any references to proceeds from the Cincinnati Southern lease to the CNOTP? It's basically the railroad leases being used by the city to fund the subway.
I don't believe that the railroad lease was generating very much money at that time. And I don't think that the railroad lease really generated much revenue until 1987, which is when Charlie Lucan was mayor. There was some sort of court decision, and out of nowhere, Cincinnati got a one-time payment of $8 million, which was a lot of money back in 1987. And then the annual revenue went way up from then on. And that's what really eventually, that's where we started getting the agitation for selling the railroad until it finally happened last year. But you definitely see the Cincinnati Rapid Transit Loop being sold to voters as a replication of that same strategy. It's like, look, it worked when we built Tennessee. It's going to work again. We're building a much shorter railroad. We're building a 16-mile railroad, not a 300-mile railroad to basically the Georgia border.
Yeah.
Of course, the other thing that was underlying all the reason it wasn't completed was the political aspect, which is a whole story unto itself. But it was started during a corrupt era. And then a reform mayor came in and it got swept out with all the bad stuff. So
I didn't want to get into that because I don't think that people from out of state are going to want to hear all about that, especially since none of those people are like nationally famous. It's not like a nationally famous old, like the Daily Mayor's in Chicago or something,
I understand why you didn't cover it, but it was a backdrop to.
Oh yeah, for sure. Because
what never got completed.
Well, you can see it right now. Anytime you have a new regime come in, it doesn't matter if they call them a reform or what they call themselves. Everything the previous regime did is bad.
Yeah.
And also the rapid transit commissioners were a last vestige of the old regime. Correct. So the new guy, Murray Seasongood, came in and he's always vilifying the Rapid Transit Commission as being corrupt. And they were just the last guys. They were still by state law allowed to keep serving. He had no control. He didn't appoint them. He had no ability to appoint replacements to them.
Right.
And that's why the Cincinnati streetcar doesn't go up to University of Cincinnati and the hospitals up there where they should have gone, right, Paul?
Yeah, that's a long story, as Jake said.
Very long story.
Okay. Do we have any other questions or comments for Jake tonight?
When the Washington subway was endangered, the Washington Post cited the Cincinnati subway as saying the whole house of cards could collapse. And so people had better get organized and get going. Otherwise, we'd be like Cincinnati. As for double overhead wires, it's interesting. One of the 3 district commissioners was from Cincinnati, and he insisted that where there was not conduit streetcar, there'd be double overhead. And there were 3 stretches of double overhead. Annapolis had double overhead. Key West, Florida had double overhead. And for a short time and a short stretch, Merrill, Wisconsin had double overhead over a bridge, a metal bridge that they thought would suffer from electrolysis. So it isn't really unique to Cincinnati, interestingly enough.
And the WNOD also had double wire over the Aqueduct Bridge in DC.
That was because it was in DC. The Potomac River is owned by DC.
Okay, any other questions about the presentation?
Can I make a comment?
Sure.
I'm just concerned about the condition of the tunnel. Does it get inspected? I mean, there's a lot of people that go down there and it doesn't look like it's maintained well. It looks pretty dangerous to go in there. I'm just wondering about liability and things like that. That's the lawyer in me.
Well,
No, I mean, the city, the waterworks is in there fairly regularly to deal with the water pipe. The city does an annual inspection. You know, I don't think that there's no risk of anything collapsing or anything. The liability is from people falling and hurting themselves, falling off the platforms or something like that in there. And you know, your cell phone probably isn't going to work down there. I can't really remember. I haven't been in it since 2014. I didn't really check my phone. Maybe I didn't even take my phone with me. But one thing that's kind of funny about it when you're actually in the tunnel is all those vents mean that you can actually hear people talking on the sidewalk above you. You can actually hear conversations sometimes. So it's kind of neat. But I can imagine there has to have been somebody in the last 100 years who got in there and got hurt and, you know, had a hell of a time getting out, because the way in and the way out has always been somewhat dangerous, except when the city just plain doesn't lock the door, which has been, you know, has happened quite a number of times.
Jake, I can, if it's interesting, I could speak to like going in there officially, because we had to lay some of the streetcar track on top of.
Oh yeah, that's right. That's right. Yeah,
so as part of the inspections that were done, there's a whole protocol for how you enter the tunnel. You have to wear air monitoring devices, and the fire department has a protocol where you have like a check-in, check-out system, kind of like a tag, and so they know how many people are down there, and they count how many go in, how many come out, what the time is that you go in, and your expected time out. Because, like you said, the second you step below ground, your cell phone service disappears. And the thing you don't realize is, someone who has been in subway systems in several different cities and spent a lot of time in subway tunnels, these are very different because there's no lights, right? That's
There's none at all.
Never installed. So it's even in the middle of the day, it's pitch black. There are no rats because there's no food, right? So you don't have to worry about any of that stuff. But none of the fire life safety systems you expect even in an older subway tunnel, like marked emergency exits, signage indicating where you go. The edges of the platforms don't have tactile strips, and it's dark. And so, like you said, you could fall right off the platforms. So it's an interesting experience if you were like sanctioned to go in there, what that's like.
Yeah, you know, I'm too old now. I'm much more safety conscious, and in fact, my eyesight, you know, my night vision is much worse now than it was 10 years ago, and I really don't have any interest in going in the tunnel now because, you know, I will have a hard time seeing. And so, you know, I think, getting back to my earlier point, I think I made at the very beginning of the presentation, though, is people think by going down there that they're going to understand the subway.
No. By
just seeing that section, and you're just not. It's a crazy story. I mean, I I could keep talking for another 2 hours about the details of the plan. I had to leave a lot out.
One last question, Jake, and then Kristen, I promise I'll shut up. The big project after the subway, right, was Cincinnati Union Terminal, and
Right.
I think for those who aren't from Cincinnati, the way that the CUT changed the city, because there were projects all over the city to move railroad tracks, build bridges, grade separate things, blah blah. It was all over the city, much like the subway. And do you know when the plans, and of course this is the private sector now in conjunction with the city, very different, but do you know the CUT project, was there any consideration of the subway in the CUT project? It doesn't seem like it, but I just wanted to see if you'd ever seen anything related to that.
No, and it's I mean, there was obviously the streetcar right-of-way that was built that was never built. So they built a provision for streetcars to run into Cincinnati Union Terminal, and it was never built. There were streetcars that ran on Dalton Street in that tunnel underneath it. So it was actually a little bit of an interchange point. But the subway itself, there was never a plan to build a rapid transit line through the West End and over to Price Hill, and which is behind Union Terminal. And so for that reason, it just wasn't part of the plan. And honestly, a walk from the subway to Cincinnati Union Terminal was a very long walk. It wasn't going to happen. I mean, no one's going to walk a mile with their luggage. I don't think they had rolling luggage back then either.
Well, and you showed the Western Hills Viaduct many times, which was a CUT project, right? That was built by railroads for the city. And the 31, the Crosstown, was the heaviest trolley route, plugged for PTM with the last streetcar from that line. But it seemed like in the design there was no consideration of the fact that the subway was there.
I know, and I pointed that out when I was showing the viaduct. And without coming to Cincinnati, people who haven't been here can't really picture it, but it's so easy to picture an incorporation of rapid transit or the streetcar system into the subway plan in either as a direct interchange or running on the same tracks, or even a 4-track subway, because there was actually an early 4-track proposal using the canal, and that goes back to 1912, and it just seems absolutely ridiculous to have a 4-track proposal back, but that was going back to the interurbans from the west side, which you were talking about, those investors from Indiana. I think because you had more than one interurban that was looking to come from Indiana into Cincinnati through Western Hills. And if you had two, then you maybe have justification for them having their own tracks into downtown Cincinnati. But really, the other big point that it's really hard to impress upon people without being here is the canal subway wasn't going to work as the downtown terminus. It's just too far from the actual center of activity. It's about 7 blocks north, and that's just too far. And then you end up with everybody transferring to streetcars. I mean, it doesn't work.
Very interesting. Thank you, Jake. Great presentation. Thank you.
Jake, were you aware that the courthouse that was built in the late 1920s had a subway station incorporated? I mean, not the track part of it, but the kind of underground tunnels that you have adjacent to the subways in New York that have the shops and stuff like that, that was incorporated into the design of the courthouse?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think the courthouse was dedicated maybe in 1919 or 1920, and the courthouse was what named Central Parkway Central Parkway. So I actually held the letter in my hand, again, at the UC's Bleegan Library. This is like minutia, from research, which is that the Rapid Transit Commissioners, they were about to drain the canal, and like, what should the new road be called? And the commissioners wrote back, oh, I know what it was. They were building the courthouse and wanted to engrave the street names into the stone. And so they had to choose a street name in order to engrave them into the stone in 1919, and they chose Central Parkway. So that's where it was named after, was that courthouse. And of course, the previous 2 courthouses, I think both of them were burnt down by riots. So the existing the existing courthouse it looks like a castle because it is. And same thing with Cincinnati City Hall. And we had, a very violent and obnoxious history in the 1800s. And, City Hall especially looks like a castle, and they can literally drop gates and keep people out. So
we had a late question in the chat here.
Sure.
Tell us something about the 1927 Beeler report.
Oh, well, okay, well, that was just, the Beeler report was an attempt to salvage the project and the one existing interurban, which was the one up to College Hill. And they were going to build the Walnut Street Subway as an out and back, or a down and back. So they were gonna not build through to the elevated section, but instead we're only gonna build about 6, maybe 5 or 6 blocks south, have a turnaround loop and go back out. The problem with that plan to me is that you're spending all that money to build under Walnut Street, but then you're not getting 2 directions of traffic, which was like really the compelling argument for the expense of the Walnut Street Subway, which again sounds so minuscule because it was only 2,500 feet long, which, you know, New York City was building 15-mile long 4-track subways. You know, for us to not be able to build a half mile of 2-track subway is kind of embarrassing. But when you don't have traffic coming in from both sides to that subway tunnel, then you can't justify that expense. And also, I think the streetcar argument may have been stronger at that point if you were just, you know, I mean, if you're just going to surface on Central Parkway, maybe there was some benefit to that, and, you know, avoiding building the Walnut Street tunnel at all. But there, you're just, in that case, you would have just been building a bypass for streetcars to bypass a big section of the city, which is good, but you still have the downtown congestion.
Okay. All righty then. I think we are going to wrap it up there. Great discussion. Thank you so much, Jake, for doing this, and thank you for taking some vacation time to
Yeah, I had to take the day off, and actually I have to go in tonight because our 3rd shift guy quit, and I'm covering half of 3rd shift tonight, if you can believe that, from
Oh no.
11 p.m. until 3 a.m.
Oh my gosh.
That's
We
the
gotta
problem
let
with
you
working
go.
at a 24-hour place. If you're 3rd shift person, you go through 2 or 3 of them every year, and it makes managers and people from their other shifts have to go cover for them.
Ah, all righty. Well, we better not keep you then. Thank you again.
Okay.
And thank you everybody for joining us tonight. If you can't make it out to the museum sometime for our spring events, we hope to see you in June for the West Penn Trolley Meet. And thank you again to those who donated, and we'll see you at the next one in May. Have a great night.
Thank you for organizing.
Have too much fun.